So I'm John Wakefield. I was born and raised in Nebraska. A lot of people have flown over it or driven through it. Not many people have actually spent much time there. And most people in Hong Kong have never heard of it. But I was born and raised Mormon. I'm irreligious now, so I am no longer Mormon. But because I was born and raised culturally at 19, I was expected to go on a mission. And so I didn't choose to come to Hong Kong. I didn't choose to learn Cantonese. I was assigned to come here, and part of that was being assigned to learn Cantonese. So first I went to Provo, Utah, where the Missionary Training Center is, and we had a 2-month intensive course. About 9 hours a day, so 6 hours of lessons, 3 hours of review, 6 days a week. And then we had 1 day off, but we would still review that evening. And then after that came here, it was basically just thrown in, immersed in Cantonese. And a lot of people talk about how it's difficult to learn Cantonese because the people here are notoriously uncooperative with speaking Cantonese with you. But it varies. I mean, some people are very, very excited and want to speak Cantonese with you, but some don't. But back then, it was a ready-made network, social network of people who were willing to speak Cantonese with me. And in fact, they were probably had this sense of that's what they're supposed to do to help the missionaries learn the language. And we would go door to door and talk to people. And it was generally, stay-at-home mothers with the kids, and a lot of them were monolinguals. And so I was just really immersed in it. And then I had a companion that had been learning the language longer than I had in the beginning. So it was like a 24-hour-a-day tutor. You'd never separate from your companion except when you were in the bathroom. And after 3 months in Hong Kong, then they made me a senior companion. So I'd been learning Cantonese for 5 months, and then I was put with a companion who'd only been learning it for 3 months. And so now suddenly I was in charge of all of these meetings that we went out and had with people to try to convert people to Mormonism. And since I was the one who spoke the better Cantonese, and I was really thrown into the deep end. So it's difficult to mimic that for those who want to learn Cantonese, but I do talk about it. Actually, I've got a book that's going to be published next year that's an edited volume, and I have a chapter in there that I talk about my experience in this, and I talk about how you can try to sort of mimic the Mormon missionary experience in some real life way, so that you can learn this. It's a notoriously difficult language, but it can be learned just like any language. Well, after my mission, I went home and went to the University of Texas, and I joined the Hong Kong Student Association, so I hung out with Hong Kong students and was speaking Cantonese actually when I was in Texas more than I was speaking English because I was hanging out with that group. And so there was just something about me wanting to keep improving my Cantonese. It's difficult to explain. I mean, sometimes people just have this passion about learning some language. And so it's like, well, I want to do something. I want to have some career where I can use Cantonese. And after I graduated, I went to San Francisco, and I was borrowing videos in Chinatown to watch TV series, TV series, just to practice listening. And then I saw Gregory Charles Rivers, who had been acting at that time for maybe a year or two. And I saw him say some few lines in Cantonese in a scene, and I said, hey, I can do that. so I decided at that point that, okay, that's what I'm going to do. So I just decided to save up my money, and I was telling everybody that I'm going to go to Hong Kong and become an actor. And I was selling furniture in a place in San Francisco, and a lot of Chinese people in San Francisco, a lot of them from Hong Kong. And one of them said he knew a director here in Hong Kong, and that was Lawrence Amon, who directed the Lee Rock movies, so Lee Rock 1, Lee Rock 2. And so he gave his contact to me, and he let him know that I was going to contact him. So as soon as I arrived in Hong Kong, I called him up, let him know that this friend had introduced us. and he immediately gave me a part in Lee Rock 2. So that was like within 2 weeks of arriving in Hong Kong, I had that, which was actually a fairly significant part for, for the typical white guy parts that you see in movies, because it was a speaking part, it was a translator. And then that led to other things because I got known from that. And another thing is, and I can't remember how I got the number, but I called ATV, and somehow I got in contact with the person who was in charge of booking extras and what they call, I guess, I'm not sure. It's like a contract worker,
writers,
so it's like you get hired by the day. And so I called him up and I said, hey, I want to act, I want to get into acting. And he says, well, yeah, a lot of people do. And I was speaking Cantonese to him, and then I said, well, I'm not Chinese, I'm white. And then he said, oh, okay. He said, well, why don't you come in and we'll talk. And then he immediately signed me up with that title as a special contract worker. And then whenever they needed a white guy in television, then they would call me up. And at the time, the extras, I think they were making $200 a day, and so I was making $600 a day because I was one step up from that. And it was for 10 hours of work. And if I worked over 10 hours, then it was $60 per hour over that. So it wasn't, double or anything, it's just a continuation of that rate. Well, I mean, in the beginning, this is really something that I wanted to do as a career. So, of course, I would just take anything. The TV was good. It wasn't as much money because it was only $600 per day. A movie at that time would be a couple thousand a day. But I had many more days on television. But the television gave me a lot more exposure. And so I would get contacted by people who got my contact number through ATV. Actually, I didn't even know much of anything about Wong Fei-ho. I just knew that this was some very famous kung fu guy from historical China who, almost had mythical stories told about him because there have been so many movies made about him. And as far as, so I didn't really have any idea about what the character was supposed to be doing and what it was supposed to be, because I wasn't told that much ahead of time. It was like a lot of movies. The script, they had a real good idea of how the story was going to unfold. But as far as the lines that were said in each scene, those were pretty much done each day. And so I would get my lines not too long before I was up. And sometimes even then, I would have memorized it and I was standing in position and someone would come over and they'd scratch out a few things, say, don't say that, say this instead. So again, it was like all I could do just to memorize it. So as far as like, what the character was supposed to be and all that, as was often the case, I didn't have this idea of how my role fit into the movie as a whole and how I was supposed to portray this. Which is unfortunate because it'd be nice if you had a clear idea of exactly what the director and the screenwriter and all that, what they had in mind of how your character, what kind of mood you're supposed to have and exactly, what your ambitions are and your motives, so you get into the character a bit more. Well, actually, the direction often came after I shot the first take. Because it was like, I wasn't told that much. These are the lines I'm supposed to say. I mean, there was direction as far as, what's going to happen here, who you're going to talk to, and what you say to who. And then I would do it, and they'd say, oh, no, you're supposed to. And then they would start to explain a little bit about the relationship you've got going on here. And so then I could get into it more. And I do this... Choi Hak, the director, was he was pretty strict, to put it one way. He was quite demanding, and I remember in one scene, the camera had fallen, and it was actually there was medicine in it. It wasn't the camera, and so I was supposed to look down at it, and I was supposed to say medicine box or whatever. And so I knew what I was supposed to say, but I didn't realize how close the shot was, and so I didn't realize how much I could turn my head, and so I was turning it too much. And he had explained that I should just really move my eyes. And because a couple of times I turned my head too much, he started saying, I can't remember what it was he was saying about my mother. But those who speak Cantonese, I think they'll know what I'm talking about. But that kind of, it was just really, come on, get this right, very like a tough coach kind of thing. So I mean, it's all good. I mean, because it's not me. He was just being strict with everybody, and you can see because of his dedication and being that demanding of everybody that you end up with the good product that the movie is. Yeah, well, as I had said before, I didn't know who Wang Feihong was other than just knowing that he was famous and that I knew he was a kung fu figure, but I didn't know much about the history. Jet Li, I knew who he was, and so it was really nice to meet him on the set because he's a really nice guy. He was great. He wasn't able to speak Cantonese really. I mean, very broken. So basically, people would speak Cantonese to him because he could understand pretty much everything, and then he would reply in Mandarin, which is what we did. But it was kind of difficult for me because my understanding of Mandarin was not great, and so, but. We were able to communicate. We worked it out, but he was very nice to me and to everybody. Well, no, actually, they did do one makeup scene that they had to redo, and they did that in Hong Kong. And so they had to set up the background to make it look like the scenes in Beijing, but most of it was done in Beijing. Oh yeah, I mean, China's changed so dramatically over the past 20 or more years. After I was in acting, I was in business and I was traveling all over China. So that was in the early 90s. So this was in, again, the early 90s, but then later in the 90s, I also traveled around. And at that time, China had already changed quite a bit. But since then, it's really advanced amazingly. But it was still, I mean, China is a real mix. I mean, in the major cities, in the city centers, you've got a city that's as modern and advanced as any in the world. But then as soon as you drive out the city very far, and that's where we shot the movie, then you can, it's rural China. Well, this was in a coliseum, which was on the outskirts of Beijing, an old abandoned coliseum. It was over a 2-month period, but I wasn't there the whole 2 months. I think I was there 2 separate times. They flew me up from Hong Kong, 2 separate occasions, and I believe that I was there for about 3 weeks each time. And the first time, the weather was nice. The second time, it got to be really cold. But yeah, so I was flown up, put up in a hotel. I mean, it wasn't the Mandarin, but it was a nice hotel. It was fine. And then a lot of days I didn't shoot, so I was just free to go around the city, do whatever I wanted. And then on the days, and in fact, there were days when I would go on site and wait all night, and then they say, well, we're not going to get to your part. But I would get paid for that day. So I only got paid for the days that I was actually called to go shoot. But there was, it ended up being a lot more days than I was originally assigned for. So what I remember most about the movie, my shooting of it, was going on site. So there was a waiting area where Jet Li, Roslyn Kwan, and then all of the other actors, and I was considered to be one of the actors from Hong Kong, so I was allowed to wait with them. And we'd play cards, we'd talk, joke around. They were all really friendly and all treated me as an equal. And so it was very congenial and enjoyed it. And then if we wanted, we could go whenever we wanted and watch the making of the film. So I enjoyed doing that, going and watching a lot of the fighting scenes and how that was done, the wires, and a lot of that was pretty amazing to see done in all the number of takes. And I do remember one in particular where I can't remember who it was on a wire, and it went up quite high. It was probably like 6-7 feet off the ground, and then came down, and he was kicking, but he got turned over and he landed on his head really hard, and everybody's going, "Ooh, are you okay?" You know, and but he just shook it off and kept shooting. So I mean, there were a lot of things that were done in that movie that seemed quite dangerous, that probably wouldn't pass safety standards, even in Hong Kong today. Well, I have the perfect story to explain that. Yes, there were a lot of extras on set that were Mandarin speakers. So you've got the director, and then you've got the co-director and on down. And the co-director was really kind of in charge of telling everybody what to do. And then, of course, there would be other people that would say everything in Mandarin to all of the extras. Okay, so they knew who understood what. And most of the people that were really in charge were all locals from Hong Kong who had flown up there. And so I was getting all of my direction in Cantonese from local native Cantonese speakers. And I remember because a lot of the extras that were sort of other Russians that were with me dressed the way I was dressed, a lot of them were in Beijing at the Language Institute learning Mandarin, but they were from different places around Europe. So some of them spoke Polish, some of them actually spoke Russian, a lot of different languages. And some of them didn't, well, none of them understood Cantonese. And so I would get the direction in Cantonese, and then I would translate that into English to somebody whose English was better among the group. And then he would translate that into Russian. And then somebody who spoke Russian who understood Polish would translate that. And so a lot of things were getting translated, 4 or 5 times. And by the time, this is like worse than when you whisper something in somebody's ear and it goes around in the same language, you can imagine. And so they say action, and we would all not do what we're supposed to do. And I remember the co-director saying how stupid they were because they didn't understand these simple instructions. She just didn't really get that all of this translation was going on, and just assumed that they were really stupid. And I remember after one shoot, I was going back, and I was going to go sit with those guys, during the break, just socialize with them. But then, and she says to me, you don't have to go sit with them. You can go sit where all the stars are sitting. Very sort of a class-based mentality. But I guess it was nice that I was considered one of the elite. No. I don't find it easy to act in any language, actually. I mean, I actually did take an acting class in San Francisco before I came to Hong Kong, because like I said before, that was my goal. I had planned ahead to come to Hong Kong and make a career out of it. So I took a class. But here, it's very difficult to improve because of the way that acting is, or the way that movies are made here. And so it's difficult to, there's not a lot of pre-practice as a group acting out the scene like you would for a play, for example, before you film it. And so I wasn't improving. And so I don't think that I ever really developed. The only thing that probably helped me develop and would say, so I would be a better actor now than I was then. I mean, yes, of course, just being in front of the camera, that builds your confidence. And the more confident you are, the more naturally you can act. You can play a character. But whether it's English, English, that's my first language, so that's always going to be stronger than my Cantonese. So even though I've acted more in Cantonese than I have in English, I would still find it easier to act in English. Yes. So Jet Li was great, and so our communication was not completely open, only because he couldn't speak Cantonese. I couldn't speak Mandarin very well, but he could understand Cantonese, and so I would speak Cantonese to him, and he would reply in Mandarin. So it was really just limited by my understanding of Mandarin and our ability to communicate. But as far as for the scenes, that didn't matter because we were directed in Cantonese, and so he understood all the direction. And we didn't really have to communicate with each other. We were just listening to what both of us were told to do. So that was fine. Originally, I was supposed to fight him. I did do Taekwondo for a few years back in Texas when I was going to the University of Texas, and then again in San Francisco for a while. But it wasn't good enough. It was good enough that I could basically just get beat up by Jet Li. Not enough for me to look like I was giving him a hard time at all. So they decided, okay, well, let's just have him get shot. Yes, so he was, he was fierce, and he was very creative with language. He could, some people would say that's not a good way to motivate because you're getting after the actors, and then how are they supposed to get into the role? But that's his style, and it's worked for him. He's produced a lot of great work. It definitely shows that he was very dedicated. So he would get upset if things weren't going as planned. And he was very detail oriented, making sure that all of the props were in position. So he would sometimes come on the set and he would adjust the candles on the table or whatever. Everybody was a little bit afraid of him, working hard. And then, so that would make things run smoothly. But then on top of that, then he would come in at the end and just make sure that everything was in place and ready to go. Well, it's interesting. When I speak Cantonese, I don't have much of an accent, but I do have an accent. But in this film, I have no accent. It's perfectly native. The original plan, not only that, but I speak perfectly native Russian as well. Originally, I was supposed to dub my part, and so I went in and I did a few lines, and then Trey Hawk said, well, I want a sexier voice. I just didn't have a deep enough voice, and I guess there was just something. So he wanted, I guess, because there was supposed to be this character that Jet Li was jealous of, a little more, because my voice is not strong, not that deep, and so and not native Cantonese. So he ended up going with a native Cantonese speaker. So it doesn't sound like me at all, which I think it's kind of odd, but I'm used to that. In another movie in fact, while I was shooting that in Beijing, that prevented me from dubbing my own part in another movie that I had done, which was 3 Summers. Different, yeah. So, and I was a teacher in that one, and I have a pretty big part in that. And so they got another French-Canadian, Pierre, who speaks Cantonese, to dub my voice. So that's interesting. Well, yeah, it was a big movie, major release. So I was recognized on the street a lot after that, and more than anything that I had done before that. But I'm used to being dubbed, so it didn't bother me much. And I'm sure it was obvious to anybody who had no idea who I was that wasn't my voice, because that was a native Cantonese speaker, and the voice just didn't seem to fit me. And it was obvious that the movie itself is dubbed. So and people are aware, I think, that a lot of so Jet Li's character. Everybody was dubbed. Some people dubbed themselves, and some people didn't. So yeah, so I wasn't disappointed, and it was fun to watch. I was involved with dub. I did dub my own character for the English version, and I have no idea where that got released and what's happened with that. So that's around there somewhere in the ether, maybe on a VCD somewhere. So I got to see my scenes repeatedly again and again. And so the other people who were there dubbing were ribbing me about it, kind of making fun of my character. But that was, just kind of poking fun at people. But yeah, no, I mean, it's not the performance that I'm most proud of. That would probably be either Echoes of the Rainbow or the Three Summers movie. And Echoes of the Rainbow was actually not dubbed, that was sync sound, and so that's my voice. But Echoes of the Rainbow, unfortunately, was dubbed while I was away, because originally they wanted to use my voice. But they dubbed.
Three Summers was dubbed, right? Not Echoes.
Echoes of the Rainbow was not dubbed, yeah. So that's my voice, sync sound. So if anybody wants to see me acting with my voice in sync sound, then it would be Echoes of the Rainbow or the TV series that I was in. Well, that's why I gave up on it, because I worked full-time at it for 2 years, and I supplemented my income with a lot of dubbing, and I was translating scripts from Chinese into English, and then also working on the dubbing. Because I could see that there were never going to be enough significant parts for me to be able to support myself. And I mean, in a way that makes sense, because movies are a representation of real life. And there are only so many white people in Hong Kong that speak fluent Cantonese. And so, so it's police officers or some people. So Brian Burrell has a part in a TV series that I think was quite revolutionary, because he was just a extra person working in the office along with all of his coworkers who were local Cantonese speakers, and he spoke Cantonese, and that wasn't made a big deal of. He just had a part in that TV series along with everybody else. And so that was really the first time where you've got a white person who's integrated into the Cantonese speaking community and then has a role in a movie. And now there are more and more people like that. I mean, there are, I'm aware of at least 2 people who are white and speak Cantonese as their first language. Now there are more and more whites who are going to local Cantonese medium schools. And so eventually there are going to be enough white faces, and then that's not just white faces, it's a lot of South Asians, people from other parts of the world who are immigrated to Hong Kong and speak fluent Cantonese, some of them native. And when you have enough of that in society and they're accepted as a part of the community, then it makes sense to include those kinds of roles in movies. So eventually that's going to happen, but 20 years ago or 30 years ago, it's just going to be bit parts. And so I felt bad about it at the time. And being, of course, typecast as the bad guy. I mean, I laughed about it, but I could just see it wasn't going anywhere. But maybe someday, yeah, there will be a serious major role, some non-Chinese Cantonese speaker in a movie.